Welcome to another episode of You Good Bro. This is episode 90 and it's all about the rise of content creation and podcasting. I'm joined by a fellow podcaster, Lazo from Lazo's podcast. And yeah, we're here to talk about this whole dream about being either a podcaster or a content creator and how it's like the new sort of dream. You know, we have certain dreams of when we grew up being footballers or being musicians or being artists. And this new dream for a lot of the future generations is being a content creator, which is what today's subject is. But as we always do on You Good Bro, we always start with You Good Bro. How you been, bro?
I'm doing well. Since we last spoke, all I have done is work. So I enjoy it. That's why I do what I do. But you know, when days are repetitive, they also feel like life goes by really quick.
Yeah.
Same 24 hours, but the same routine makes you feel that way.
Honestly, I'm telling you. You know what? This is one of my favorite podcasters in Manchester. You know, we actually met at a creative event maybe a few months ago. Shout out Monday Feels, ran by Jessica Paul. And since then, I've just been locked in with your podcast.
Yeah.
Your podcast is so engaging. You've had a vast array of different guests, such as politicians, local politicians, to everything.
My podcast is a definition of no niche. Because Afzal Khan, the Manchester MP, 10 plus years of experience in Parliament. My guest before that, Deshne Murad. If you're Kurdish like me, everyone knows who Deshne is. She's like a global superstar singer. She primarily focused on the Kurdish message. And then my next podcast most recently was Backpack Boz, who takes journeys for mental health, 2,000 miles walking across America. No niche whatsoever. Just I like that because it allows me to explore everything, everybody.
And that's what, that's why, we engage so well, just talking about content and talking about podcasting. And, you're the second podcaster, the third podcaster we've had on. So it's always good to connect with fellow podcasters. Tell me a bit about yourself, a bit about your upbringing, a bit about what you're into podcasting.
I appreciate you. I'm a creative. I've been a creative since I became an adult at 18. Before that, I was just probably a kid wandering around academically, not sure what to do. I stumbled into architecture. I stumbled into podcasting. With a lot of great things in life, they end up coming from the plans you never made. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So honestly, when I first started podcasting, it was just about sitting down and having conversations I would have with my friends anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I use Podcast Go as my distributors, right? So they sent it to Apple and Spotify and Amazon Music.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at my downloads one day, like less than a year in, and I was seeing tens of thousands of downloads go. This was never the intention. I knew podcasting could get you there, but it was never the intention.
Mm-hmm.
So from there, I was like, you get a blessing like that, you jump on it and you move quicker.
Mm-hmm.
So I started getting guests on, all sorts of guests.
Mm-hmm.
I've posted 49 episodes to date, and I've enjoyed every single second. It's probably the only thing I do with no stress. So
yeah. And I think that's comes into today's episode, There's content creation, there's podcasting. It's a dream for so many. And it's a dream that a lot of people are getting into, whether it's for the right reasons or it's not. That's what we're going to cover today. We're going to cover the pros and cons of the rise of content creation and also why people get into it for the right reasons, why people get into the wrong reasons,
I hear that.
So in terms of the pros, I've just done a bit of research and I think with a lot of our lives, COVID was a big change, COVID was a big change where we're stuck in the house. There's not much for people to do. So a lot of people consumed a lot of podcasts, a lot of content creation. A lot of people grabbed the phones and they said, you know what, I'm going to try this content creation thing. And for a lot of people, it was a way to sort of express their thoughts in many different ways. And you've seen in recent years, the creation of a lot of people who've built brands just off the phone or just by speaking or just by building something. So what sort of changed? Because you're like me, you're in your 30s. From the time just about hey, you're part of the 30s club now. But when did you see a pivot in sort of when content creation became all right, this is what the nerds do, or not the nerds, that's a wrong word. This is what this comes like a sort of something which a few people do to it becoming mainstream. When did you really notice that?
I never felt it was like the geeky nerdy side, and I'll tell you why. I thought it was fun. So when I first really discovered YouTube and found people that I enjoyed, the first guy was Ray William Johnson.
Oh, yeah.
Top-notch comedian, absolutely amazing storyteller. Then there was obviously, even though I wasn't really actually playing FIFA at the time, there was KSI.
KSI.
I
of
just
course.
enjoyed screaming Hesky for no reason.
We can't scream that now.
Yeah.
Disclaimer.
He's a legendary footballer. But the point is that what I found from social media was pure enjoyment. And then you see different layers to social media, which is utilizing it for your business or your brand, having a reach that you never thought you had before. Last night, just you probably saw it in my Instagram story, I just randomly went over my stats like I always do. And I looked at top 10 countries since episode 1 and top 10 countries from the beginning of 2026 to now. And it's crazy for me to say this, but when I say top 10 countries, I'm talking about Mexico, Brazil, Ecuador, United States, Canada. That was never the expectation. But the reach is the greatest thing that you could get from social media.
Mhm.
The fact that people can enjoy your content on the other side of the world is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But I guess that's the norm these days, because you could also pick up your phone and FaceTime your family member on the other side of the world.
Yeah. And I think that's what's changed a lot. You know, I remember for a lot of people, if they wanted to get into drama or acting or even presenting, there was a route, you know,
Yeah.
you had to go on, you had to apply to be on Blue Peter, you had to apply to be on, you know, CBBC, or I'm talking the UK, or like Nickelodeon in America, or even in the UK. And there's a certain route that you took to take that. Whereas now the barrier to entry is so not necessarily low. Anyone could pick up the phone and open themselves up to an audience which is so massive, whether it's TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and they can build a community within months just off being themselves. And I think that the attraction for a lot of people, if they've seen that people like you mentioned, KSI, Ray William Johnson, I've seen Sunday League teams. I love football, right? I've seen Sunday League teams, SE Dons, hashtag United. They've built brands and communities around the whole world just from putting the content on the phone.
100%.
And
There
that-
used to be gatekeepers,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Yeah.
And now the gatekeepers are wanting to make sure they stay relevant. So they're also active on social media, looking for people who they could bring on.
Yeah.
The days of being chosen by the big TV record labels and all of these things is still there.
Mhm.
But it's now we're realizing through independent artists or creators that we almost have as big as a voice. I mean, a lot of podcasters have bigger platforms and listenerships than a lot of mainstream media outlets.
Of course. And then what I think is there's some notes I've made, and I think this covers a lot of the main points around social media. So I'd say like the first thing is low barrier to entry. The cost to get into social media, the cost to get into content creation is minimal to none compared to what it was. You know, even like your phone is almost, you know, you can get an iPhone for less than £1,000 and it records in 4K, right? Back in the day, you needed like a camcorder, you needed a camera crew, you needed an editor. You can do it all on your phone. You can do everything on your phone. You know? And that means it's a lot more accessible to a lot more people, especially around the world, especially in areas where there might not, maybe working class communities, maybe a lot of people who don't have access to those sort of things which as you said, the gatekeepers potentially had through like TV networks.
I have a stat for all of you. The population is about 8 billion, right? 8.1 billion. About 5.5%. Sorry, you cut that and let's do it again.
We can edit out.
Don't cut it. Don't cut it. But here's the stat, right? 8.1 billion people on this planet. 5.5 billion of them have access to social media. And this includes mass poverty. So about 700 million people live in what's considered really bad poverty, where they earn less than $2.15 a day, not an hour, a day. And actually, even within that, about 2/3 of them have access to social media. Now, it might not necessarily make them money. It might not necessarily give them a huge platform. That's rare and few and far between. But still, I think you see it, acknowledge it. And also, how can it be that so many people have phones in comparison to shortage of food even? Like, phones have become such a big thing that you find them in the poorest of places.
Yeah. Because for a lot of people, it's a way for them to communicate. A phone's not just the phone, it's also their bank card, it's also their TV, it's also... So a phone is not just a phone these days. So it kills about 6 birds with one stone. But a few things I've got down here, and like, just feel free to interject. So one thing we've already covered is obviously the low barrier to entry, ownership as well. The ownership of your content, as we've seen, you can build you can be authentic to yourself and find your audience. Whereas before, it's like you were pigeonholed by, all right, we want a presenter like this. Whereas you can present yourself how you want to present yourself, find your own audience, and then brands will come to you, which we found.
Yeah.
You know, how do you feel about that?
I think it's perfect. It's like university. You know, the weird kid in college who doesn't fit in, but then there's so many people at university, there's a club for everything. So I think it's beautiful in that way. But more importantly as well, the idea of someone behind the screen telling me what's right or what's hype is actually coming back. Let me throw this curveball at you. We have what I like to call the algorithmic boys. There are certain creators out there who do nothing but look at their algorithm. Now, to me, these people aren't creative because the creators make the algorithm, not follow the algorithm. But they're so desperate to keep their views, and I can't speak for how much they make or don't make. They're so desperate to keep that, and perception is a false reality, so numbers are everything, that they would rather follow the algorithm than be the algorithm. The only thing I've got to say to anybody who considers themselves a creator, it's not your job to follow the algorithm, it's to alter the algorithm, it's to add to the algorithm.
It's to make your own space within the algorithm. So one thing I love about content creation and about, you know, we mentioned about the ownership is you can find your audience. You could, someone who's into Pokemon cards, they'll say, I'm into Pokemon cards. They'll find their audience. Someone who's into gaming, they'll be like, I'm into Tekken, or I'm into Super Smash Bros. I'm into, like, I don't know, NBA 2K26. They'll find the audience because they'll post online and say, this is what I play. Then there's those who do travel the world. They'll find the audience. And I think that's happened now, is the ownership over the content is we create what we want to create and our audience finds us. Whereas instead, when it was the barrier to entry was the gatekeeping, where it's like there's a documentary sort of budget, there's this budget, there's that budget, that limited the sort of creativity around the content you can create. Whereas we have our ownership of content, we can create whatever we want. There's people who fall asleep on Twitch and they have an audience. So I think, like, what do you feel about that? I feel like that's one very positive thing. And obviously, no shame to the people who watch people sleep, but that's not for me. What do you feel about that?
There's a funny example that comes to mind. One of the highest grossing YouTube videos is The Fireplace. And I remember when I was at uni, all of my friends, whenever they didn't want their computer to turn off during their lunch breaks or whatever, like we were working on designs, they would put The Fireplace video on. And I saw at the beginning of the year, that video was generated like $3 million. That was really crazy.
Do you know, another big one as well, sorry to interrupt, lo-fi hip-hop.
Yeah.
Do you know the and it's like a playlist full of instrumental hip-hop for about 6 hours. So people put that in the background just while they're working.
It's calming.
And it's calming. It controls your nervous system, but everything's got a niche. And I think that's the great thing with ownership. That's a positive thing with content creation. There's no limits to what you've got. Like you said, you've got audience all over the world just by posting based in Manchester, getting some great guests. So it's like, you never know what reach you'll get based on what you put out there to the world.
No, it's actually crazy. And I promise you, this was never the plan, but I'm glad we're here. I would say one thing though, the access to everybody is a double-edged sword, because now you have more competition than ever.
We'll come on to that in the next.
Okay, sorry.
So we'll close on a few other positives as well. And this is probably a big thing. And this is maybe a pro and a con. The real income potential. When you build your brand yourself, you have a real income potential where instead of you become a presenter, but people see you on TV, then a brand comes to you. You cut the middleman out, you go. Or like an actor who's, say for example, you get signed as an actor, you get in Hollywood film, then you get a brand deal. Whereas now people are going, okay, I'm into watches. This person gauges enough people who are into watches. What happens is they manage to get a brand deal to promote watches directly because they said, okay, you've gained 1 million followers through interest in watches. Check out Nico Leonard, for example, who is a watch dealer who reviews watches. He's probably got deals direct from these watch brands without even having a middleman, a traditional broadcaster interject within that. So I feel like that is a big attraction to a lot of people. And we see the rise of influencers, and we see every day on our TikTok and our Instagram, promoted by this, promoted by that. But they built a brand big enough to gauge a brand deal to sort of merge the two things together. So merge their audience with a potential brand who's interested in their sort of community.
I hear that.
What do you
I
feel
hear that.
about that?
Again, you know what it is? Honestly, cliche, power to the people.
Yeah.
Power to the people. No longer are we at the mercy of people who think you're good if or not good enough. You just go out there and you prove it.
Mhm.
And it does take a lot of consistency. It does take a lot of mental strength as well, in a sense that social media can be a dark place. Directly, you know, people will say things to you. I don't know about you, but me, I just find it funny when people insult me. I
Yeah.
remember one time I had this video up and someone commented on TikTok, they will literally let anyone talk. I just laughed. I sent it to my guest house. I look what they're saying about us. It was just funny though.
But you see it all the time with
Yeah.
like, oh, they should give podcast licenses. It's like, you're just doing it for fun.
Can I just tell you something though? I'll be honest. The generic stereotype of certain podcasters is somewhat true, because I think the level of care that me and you take with our content is not shared by everybody. Some people just turn on the mic, quite literally just turn on the mic. I don't like it personally. I do think that some people take the platform for granted. But if it is just fun, then it is fun.
But it's also a duty of care. Just like you would be in the workplace, just like you'd be in public. You need a footprint which you're happy to present yourself with.
It's not even that. Like, you know what people don't realize about comedy? This is not a tangent.
Okay.
What's something people don't realize about comedy?
Tell me. I don't
How
know.
hard it is.
Yeah.
Right. Good comedy is written and it's excessively hard. Now you're thinking, what does that matter? Because a lot of these Donnies, all they do is they sit and crack those personal jokes between their friends. They think they're funny. They're not actually funny.
But they're not. Because what I think, this is what I found, like, when I started podcasting, it's like, you've got to remember, so with my, shout out to Mom, but with my co-host, we've got to remember, it's not just me and the boys having a conversation. There's some people listening, and there's some people who are gauging every word we say, and who spend every week listening to us. Same with your audience too. So we've got to present ourselves in a way which is palatable to a wider audience. So, for example, we're based in Manchester, you're based in Manchester. I have a lot of Manchester quotables, which someone from London or someone from America, which we have listeners in America, or our biggest listeners is in Ireland, you might not reference, oh, we're talking about Charlton. So I always say, oh, it's South Manchester, or I'll always make a reference. So it puts your picture in the mind of where we're from, you know? So if we're ever talking about things that might not be relevant to the wider audience, we always paint a picture in their head to make sure they bring them back into the room. Because sometimes when building a podcast, it's always about, it's a skill to it, as you say. It's not just talking on the mic with your friend. There's a sort of, it's like a subtle skill to how you present yourself.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like you said, what you said was really important, duty of care. Just take care of things. Like I said, I come from a creative background. Details are everything.
Yeah.
You saw me helping you set up the camera earlier, and I was like, here, there, everywhere.
Yeah, you saw,
And don't get me wrong, like, again, I would like to see more and more people express themselves, but I see the stereotype sometimes in the generic podcaster.
Yeah. And there's one final point before we close the pros section. The pros section is skill stacking. A lot of tangible skills you build from creating your own platforms. Like, for example, I mentioned CapCut earlier, editing skills, you know, that's the barrier to entry to editing. You know, back in the day, you had to used to get like a Adobe, you know, and you have to download it, and it's like probably costs £500-600. Whereas now you can get these apps which probably cost £10 a month, and you can learn how to edit to a good standard. You know, there's marketing. You market yourself, you know, promoting, what time do I post? You know, these things aren't, you know, things which you necessarily learn. You learn on the fly when building content or building podcast. Another thing is sales, you know. If you, for example, have a live show, we had our first live show in December, shout out everyone who came out, promoting it, having decent guests, building a decent show, or if you've got merch or if you've got anything like that, it's building something that the audience will want, you know. Say, for example, I'm a content creator who talks about, I don't know, life or something like that. It's saying, okay, what would my audience, if my audience are buying into me as a person, what would my audience sort of buy into in terms of merch? Will I make my merch generic, or will I make it relevant to the ideas which I'm talking about, you know? If, for example, if you're doing, I don't know, if you're into, like, I love video games. If you're into video games, would you partner with a video game brand to build something which someone might use with their consoles, their PlayStation 5, their Xbox, or We've seen it with a lot with like KSI and stuff. Like he had discount codes back in the day for discount codes for FIFA coins and stuff like that because he knew his audience would gauge into that. So that's where the brand deals, and then also the sales element where you can sort of build some revenue from. You work with, and that's what I feel like the pros of content creation and podcasting are. It's all these tangible skills which you don't necessarily learn without, having that platform,
Or like you said, one bird, 6 stones.
Yeah.
Or one bird and one stone. You can make that into a clip.
Yeah.
No, but you know what's mad as well? Like me and you will say things like back in the day, but we're not that old.
We're not, but the thing is, you've got to remember though, we live in a fast world.
Right.
We live in a fast world. I've seen content creators who were big 2-3 years ago, gone. And then there's a new thing, and it'll come on to the next point, which is more the cons of content creation and it being a low bar to entry.
If I can go back to that previous point though, with the whole Adobe, CapCut, all of these things, it is easier and more accessible to edit. But the reason I said we're not that old is because when me and you were in college, just the idea of a luxury of a school having good funding and having these softwares, like not every computer had it.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's everywhere because it's often considered the rate of exponential growth. And that's what they're scared about with AI.
Yeah.
That this change will come so quickly that you will not be able to recognize 2026 from 2031, and that's just 5 years.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of merch and everything, that's all in one place now.
Yeah.
If you have merch on your video on YouTube, just above your comment section, it's being advertised. It's kind of
it's not how fast things are moving, and that comes on to our next section, which is the cons of content creation, like podcasting, which would be, I'll run for a few of them. First one I've got down here is survivor bias, surviving a certain context where you might be making content for a certain majority of time, but you only see the ones who are successful. The majority of channels on podcasts get 0 to no traction. So how do you keep going when you're not gaining any traction? Because that's the difficulty, because we talk a lot about, like, we do things for fun, but at the same time, we do things for people to engage with. So have you ever found a time where you sort of like, you know what, this episode got loads of traction, and then there might have not been an episode which got as much traction? How did you find that? Or how have you found it in the past?
I have 2 answers for that. The number one answer I think is the most important is I accepted roughly 2 years ago that if all of this ended tomorrow, I'd be eternally grateful for the opportunities and the fun that I've had and the growth that I've had, right? But number 2, sometimes I, like you, stare at my numbers and I think to myself, I've come too far, and I start thinking about how I'm going to absolutely destroy and take over the industry, and how I'm going to put your favorite podcaster's head on spike as a trophy. And so it's a balance. There's a balance between, I think for me, it comes from a spiritual standpoint. Like, whatever God gives me, I will take.
Yeah.
And whatever doesn't come wasn't meant for me.
Yeah.
But if you don't enjoy it, you can't get through that period of little to no traction.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Because the people who get there often did spend months and years not that popular. Now you think they're popular.
But
carry on.
There's the iceberg effect where you don't even see the person until the iceberg's up here. And also as well, I treat it like the gym, right? You can go to the gym for 2 years, 3 years. You might not get a 6-pack. You might not get abs. They might not even see anything until you've reached that point. So it's like, what's the point of, imagine this, right?
But even you might not see anything.
Yeah.
We need to reword that, because forget what other people are saying. You might not even see your results for 2-3 years. Do you have the endurance?
Do you have the endurance to keep going? It's like a marathon, not a sprint, as they say. Do you have the endurance to build a community, to build a crowd, to go 2-3 years where you're putting money into a project, you're paying for things? I know we talked about the barrier to entry is low, but iPhones aren't getting cheaper. Paying £10 a month, paying for studio space, paying for sorting out guests, all this stuff takes time and effort. Do you have the capabilities to do that? Because I think what a lot of people see the success of others and feel like, 6 months. Why have I not got why am I not getting 100 listens a podcast? Why am I not getting 1,000 listens a podcast? I'm not getting 10,000 and they'll look at other people in their sort of space and go, this podcast is bad, or this content creator is that bad. I'm doing better work than this person. All it is about proximity. And all it's about to keep going, because eventually, what did we say earlier? Your crowd will find you when they find you.
You know, it's funny. Every creator feels that way. There's on one of J. Cole's early songs, there's an ad lib at the beginning. It's Jay-Z, right? And Jay-Z saying, "There's a rapper out there. He's probably at home eating cereal right now. He wants to take my place. I'm gonna sign him, so he can't take my place." But I think I've butchered that a bit. But my point is, even the mentality of the greatest, there's sometimes that grind part at the beginning
Yeah,
where you are frustrated, where you do actually feel like, bro, I'm better than that guy.
yeah.
I do put more care into my content, but it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Everybody has to pay their dues.
Everyone has to put the work in. Every
Yeah.
single person has to put the work in. And like I said with the gym, some people have different BMIs. Some people have different things which affects how they
I hear
navigate,
that.
right? So certain people won't have the same path as other people.
Mm.
Other people will have different paths, you know? Another thing that I'll come on to, which was the second point, I've skipped a few points because I know we kind of touched upon it. Oversaturation. That's another con. It's generally harder to break through now than it is 3 years ago because everyone's doing it. But to just jump in before I say this, everyone's doing it, but the people who are doing it for the right reasons will stick at it.
They'll stick at it, so they're more likely to make it. But like you said, if it's a football stadium, right? So the Old Trafford holds 75,000 people, and let's just say, for argument's sake, there's 10 barriers, 10 spinning little metal things that you go through. If you increase that to 20, more people get in quicker. If you reduce it to 5, people get in slower. Or if you're almost at overcapacity, 75k seats, 100,000 people trying to get in. That endurance is how you stay relevant. I think on YouTube, there are over 100 million YouTube channels, but only about 30 million of them are active.
Yeah. And also as well, I've read this about podcasts. The average podcast is approximately like 7 episodes before people end it.
Yeah.
And what happens is, with oversaturation and the low barrier to entry, people don't know what it takes to carry things on. This is episode 90, right, of my podcast, right?
Mad.
People don't recognize the hours it takes, the Ubers, the sorting out guests, the sorting out rooms, the navigating spaces, thinking of episode ideas. People don't realize that. And what happens again, it kind of ties into the point about the survivorship bias. The oversaturation can put you off. But if you don't start something, when we start, you know, it's kind of like a musician, right? So I've always been into music, right? I say, I play saxophone because I like jazz music, right? You learn saxophone for the love of playing saxophone. You don't learn a saxophone for, I'm going to be Miles Davis or I'm going to be the next Herbie Hancock or something. You do it for the love. So I think with oversaturation, you've got to ask yourself, and a lot of content creators will ask themselves, am I doing it because I want to eventually get a brand deal or I want to eventually become famous? Like, there's a million other podcasters out there, a million other content creators out there, and you see them online getting these brand deals. Or are you doing it because you feel you have a voice and you feel you have something to say in this world, and you feel that, you know what, with the small audience I've built, I feel like I'm making a positive difference to their lives, you know, or even not. Like, sometimes it doesn't have to be that deep. Sometimes it could just be, you know what, if I'm doing content, I'll make someone laugh. I'll make someone they'll watch my little videos or my little captions to just go, I like that. That's made my day feel easier. Are you making a small difference to someone's lives or to the audience you've built?
I'm going to throw you a curveball, bro.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to have pure intentions to make it. You just have to be consistent, make the right connections. There's plenty of douchebags that win. Let's be real.
Of course.
Right? And there's too many different metrics. Like, I don't usually judge people for one main reason. Life is circumstantial at the best of times. That means I don't know what you went through today, yesterday, or the day after. I don't know why you didn't make it. I don't know why you missed that Uber. I don't know why you didn't go from podcast 80 to 81 or 150 to... Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Mm-hmm.
There's too many intangibles that are just hard to measure
Yeah.
about how people make it. But to go back to your actual question, yeah, you should be trying to make a difference. From a creative standpoint, I'd say it differently. I'd say you should be trying to take what's in here on there.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think, like, our ethos of our podcast with me and Jamal, the whole You Good Bro brand built from WhatsApp and group chat conversations where we're having deep conversations just as we are now. And we just thought, you know what, we've got something here. We've got something here. And that's what our ethos is. So if we're ever thinking like, man, like, oh, we're feeling down or we're feeling low about certain things, we always just go back to the ethos. And I'm probably the same with you. Like you're very introspective and you have very wide conversations with a different spectrum of people, but that is the ethos of your podcast.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I feel that that's probably, you know, what you always have to sort of remind yourself of. If your intentions aren't pure with anything, because a lot of people, and we're in a cost of living crisis, a lot of people are monetary focused, and there is money to be made in content creation. There is money to be made, but there's also money to be made in dentistry or lawyer, or working as a doctor. But you wouldn't want your doctor to be focused on money. You'd want him to be focused on his practice, because I don't want my doctor pulling up in a Range Rover and he's thinking about, oh, I'm going to go to the club tonight. I want him to think about me, man. Think about my grandma, think about my mum, and think about this. And that's the same way I think about content. You can see a mile off where someone's intentions are.
Me and you can.
Yeah.
But not always the audience. I would say this though. To take back to that ethos, again, I look at it ridiculously creatively. So every podcast is deliberate. So I can honestly say, been blessed up to now, alhamdulillah, the vast majority of people I ask, about 90% of them, they say yes. Whether they're big, small, or no matter what they're doing in life.
Mhm.
Why do they say yes? Very simple. It's because my guests are deliberate. I might be following these guys for months, for years. I might already know them from before I started a podcast. So when I send an invite out, it's sincere. To an extent, it can be felt. I might add in a bit of detail that they didn't even know their regular fan knows about them. That's where that purity and that ethos comes in. With every podcast, I'm like you, a lot of background research, even before I've sat with my guests, to make them feel respected. When they sit opposite me, they know that this person took me seriously. I'm not here for my followers and my likes.
Yeah.
I'm not here because Lazo can get big off my name. I'm here because he genuinely respects what I do. And that's why as well with every podcast, I have a different art cover for every guest. Every guest, every podcast has a personalized name, a name without their name in it. Like for example, my latest podcast was called 2000 Miles for Mental Health. So reading that, you don't know who my guest is. My previous one is Politics That Matters. My previous one is Cultural Icon. So I sell it with the absolute soul of the podcast before I even tell you who the guest is.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of it.
Yeah. And I think that covers so much of the sort of intricacies of what it takes to be a podcaster.
Yeah.
And having that fine-tuned detail is a very important thing as a podcaster, because you need to know what you're selling, or not necessarily what you're selling. You need to know what you're providing to your audience, and what you're providing to the audience is a story, because every story varies depending on the guest.
It is a bit funny though, because I know this, JD knows this. Like, you passionately record for a good 60 minutes, 90 minutes. You know full well 90% of people don't even get past minute 30.
But at the same, but at the same time, you've got
Yeah.
to remember, you partly record for yourself. You partly go, I want, like I would say this, when I do podcasts, I sometimes go, what do I want to listen to? And then what happens is, when people listen back, people, like I said, the audience are like me. I'll find my people eventually. I'll find my circle, and we have done. Fortunately, we have a consistent listener base who engage with us every week. Same with yourself. So, you know, that's what you do. You be authentically yourself. You don't sell, because there's a difference between, as you said before, not chasing the algorithm, going, all right, what's hot this week? What's hot that week? There's a difference between doing that to be doing, okay, what do I want to talk about this week?
But JD, the sad truth is it works. Like, some of the people, without mentioning names, people can already think of them. There are very generic people who have massive platforms. And there are people who simply do the content of what's day-to-day relevant, which means every day they jump on the next algorithmic wave.
You've got to remember, right? And I was using music analogy, right? There's artists who are pop artists, they'll be big for 5 years, right? But then there's the artists who've got a cult following and they'll tour for the rest of their life.
Yeah. So what he's saying is, J. Cole is the greatest rapper. J. Cole is the greatest rapper of all time.
So, just to close this section, there's two things that we've probably talked off mic, which do affect it: burnout and mental health cost. And that is where, and I talked about it in one of my other projects as well. Do follow What's on Your Mind if you aren't already. But for a lot of content creators and a lot of people who are, you know, do podcasts, it's not their main source of income. So it's easy to get burnt out, but it's about balance. It's about work-life balance. The same way you go to the gym, the same way you exercise, the same way you manage your time is all about how do I sort of focus around making sure that whatever I'm doing fits into a schedule which I can manage emotionally, physically, and mentally, you know?
It's a double-edged sword. So number one, unfortunately, the actual statistics show us that there isn't as much money for everybody as people would like to think. I've been asked more times than I can count how much money I make. And I'm telling you, mate, I still have a day job. And I like that. Listen, I like that. I tell you why. I have a perfect balance.
Yeah.
Like, don't get me wrong. I would love to do nothing more than have a career where every day I sit with someone different. That is the goal, right? You want to be that
Yeah.
Joe Rogan. You want to be on that level. But until you get there, it's nice to have that balance of I have a job, and then in the evenings, in the night, I make time for my podcast, but I'm flexible. So I'll randomly record with you on a Wednesday. You know what I'm trying to say to you?
Yeah.
However, I know the stats for this. On YouTube, I think about 30% of people are monetized, but what percentage of those people could quit their day job through YouTube alone is about 1 to 3%.
Because as well, like I said, you could have a good year, a
Yeah.
good month, and you could be making 10 times what you're making with your day job. But how long can you sustain that? If you quit your job off that,
Yeah.
you could just have 1 month. You could say one thing controversial which a lot of the audience might not like, and you might get cancelled, which is a big thing as well. How long can you sustain that? It takes a long time. I think you've got to think about it like, unless you're like bringing in millions, like a Mr. Beast or, you know, Sidemen, or it's very hard for a lot of people, unless you may be bringing in 5 figures on a regular basis for a long period of time. It's hard for a lot of people because there's also the, what do they call it? The sort of, is it like the money jump, I think it's called, where it's like you get a sort of, oh, what's it called now? The lifestyle jump, where it's like you get used to living on 10 grand a month and your lifestyle jumps and your expenses go up. And then you get that same baseline level sort of lifestyle where you come out with at the end of the month, you come out with the same amount you would in terms of like disposable income as you would if you're working like a 9 to 5.
I have 2 answers to that. Number one, so because social media is so vast, if you're a content creator, YouTube, for example, doesn't have to be your only source. So YouTube can bring in 40% of your money and maybe some brand deals and some talks, or whatever you do, that can bring in other money. You could even have something like this. So one of our friends, or I've just made him a friend today, but you know, the guy who,
shout out Sammy,
who has a podcast and has this amazing space that we'd both love to record here all the time. So you could expand in that sense. Like people could bring a venture to you. It doesn't have to be just through YouTube. But to go back to YouTube again, I think of the, 1 second, I don't want to get this wrong, 3 million plus YouTube channels make money, but even fewer, around 1 to 3%, actually make sustainable money that they can live off. And Mr. Beast is a complete outlier.
He's a complete outlier. He's a billionaire.
Mr. Beast is everything that's right about content creation, number one. And I love one of the interviews he gave. He said to somebody, if you haven't even put out 1,000 videos, what are you coming to me for advice for? You haven't even gone past 10%. And that's so true, man.
Yeah.
But remember as well, there is nothing wrong with having a job, something that you passionately put your life into before social media. Because for most people our age, their first goal in life wasn't a podcast.
No, it didn't exist.
It didn't exist.
It didn't exist.
It was radio.
Radio, yeah.
Yeah, which if you wanted, you had to go completely out your way for it. Do you know what I mean? So it could be that you're a solicitor, an architect, a doctor. Nothing wrong with sticking to that.
Yeah.
And then eventually one day when you can retire from it, you do what you got to do.
And of course, I feel it's important to have a purpose outside of your job because everyone sort of, like I said, we've mentioned a few times, we're in a cost of living crisis. You have to sustain yourself somehow.
Yeah.
You know, I've spoke to business owners. I've spoke to, you know, people who own coffee shops, bars, and they're having to do Amazon in the evening because they're having to do that to sustain their dream. And there's different ways to sustain a dream. And I think the one thing I'll talk about just before we close this section is with the burnout and sort of the mental health aspect, because we are big on mental health on this podcast, is you've got to manage it and you've got to always remind yourself of what you're doing. And there's a luxury of what we're doing. There's a luxury of starting your own thing. and being brave enough to jump in front of a camera every week and do what we're doing. And a lot of people are scared to do this. But I always think about this, like I said, I just feel like we have this chance at life, 80 years on average, where we can just give things a go. So if you want to do something, just give it a go. And you've got to be fearless, and you've got to sort of take the consequence and go, as long as I can manage my mental health, manage my well-being, and always remind myself why I'm doing something to the purest of my ability, that will keep you going.
I hear that. I would say though, everyone, whether you're a content creator, doctor, solicitor, or the guy working down the road, in the Western world, you are a victim to capitalism.
Of course.
Everybody's on the wheel. You touched on something earlier, which is really important. How do you stop yourself from making that jump? Because that is what keeps a lot of people from feeling rich, is by doubling their expenses as soon as their money goes up.
Yeah.
I'm not saying do not live a good life. I can't tell you how to make or spend your money because I don't make it with you.
Mm-hmm.
But whether you're a content creator or a doctor, you have to be careful of jumping with your money.
So to close the episode, this is a big question. It's probably more in sort of our experience in life. Do you feel that like content creation and being podcasters and being online, do you feel it's taken over in some ways of the traditional mediums of maybe being a football player or being a presenter or being a radio host or being even a DJ? Do you think it's taken over as the new dream in sort of like a creative outlet?
It's a bit of both. I think it's merged them. There are people of both jobs these days. They can have their podcast and also be a part of big TV networks. I mean, your co-host is a good example of that.
Shout out to Mark.
Yeah, so I don't think I think where the dream aspect comes in might be for the younger generation. YouTube especially changed a lot of things and it grew with the younger audience. It's one of the reasons why whenever I make content as well, we try to stay with that core and young audience and grow with them. You were talking about sustainability. How do you stay sustainable and how do you stop that drop 2 years in? You got to grow with your audience. Your audience can't be based off a wave, right? So if you're somebody, the World Cup just passed, if you're somebody who did nothing but make World Cup content and you stop there, well, you're not be relevant for another 4 years. We can carry over that into the Premier League or La Liga or Serie A. I don't know where the dream aspect comes into it, but the idea that your reach is limitless is enough of a dream for everybody.
Yeah.
It's like, can I compare it? Back in the day when people used to live their small towns to go to the big city, social media is the big city.
Yeah. And I feel what happens as well is there is that thing of almost sitting in front of your computer, making Twitch, which streaming's like the next wave, or sitting in front of your computer and doing YouTube and just talking to a camera on TikTok and becoming an overnight success. That is the new dream. That is the new rags to riches almost. And because it is the new rags to riches, the oversaturation is there and not everyone will make it. So I think for the next generation, I still feel like the traditional forms of like careers or even mediums like football, and they'll always be there. But I feel like with the content creation medium, it's always adapting into new things. 1 minute it's podcasting, next it's YouTube, next it's TikTok, the next it's streaming. I feel like it's too wide of a spectrum to just say it'll always be that dream.
Yeah. It could end up being in 5 years virtual reality communities.
Yeah.
Quite literally. But also like this example came to mind now. So kids these days love Ronaldo as much as me and you do. But we used to watch the matches. Now they just hear speed.
Ronaldo, yeah.
You know what I'm trying to say? So he's still more popular than ever, but just taking in a different way. The brands are still selling the same things, just promoting it in a different way. So sometimes it's almost like being a business owner and finding different ways to sell the same content. And that's why so many companies are desperate for the attention that comes, that is organically grown through the likes of me and you.
Of course. And I think one thing just to close this as well, adapting with time.
Yeah.
Because if you reach a point where you go, okay, my time is done here. My time is done chasing this wave. Say if you do like 10 years and you feel like, you know what? I want to try something new. There's nothing wrong with that. Like we say, content, some people are people who will stick at something for a life, whether it's a musician. And there might be content creators and there might be podcasters who do it to the 80s. But then there'll be people who get to like maybe the 30s or 40s who go, you know what? I'll build a space. I'll build a production house. I'll build my own social media and I'll advance onto something different, just like people do in careers. And I feel that's probably the biggest takeaway from the rise of content creation and podcasting. It's always building skills, building an audience, but also not being afraid to adapt.
Just do it.
Yeah, man.
No, quite literally. Nike's not paying me. No, just do it. Because honestly, one message can change the trajectory of your podcast. You know, you could go from landing guests like yourself that are up and coming to landing absolute solid people in the industry. Reach out to people. Don't be scared. Whatever you do, do it with conviction.
For sure.
That's the only thing I've got to say to anybody.
Appreciate it. Well, you know what? That's been a great episode. Thanks for coming on, Lazo. Where can people find you on your podcast as well? Shout them out.
My biggest platforms are YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and Instagram if you want to connect with me. On the podcasting side, it's just Lazo's Podcast. So with an S, Lazos podcast. And then Instagram, lazo.podcast. And yeah, you can catch everything, including even behind the scenes from today.
Sick. Well, that's been episode 90 of You Good Bro podcast. Thanks to Lazo for joining me. And it's been a great topic. Probably going to talk a lot about it off mic as well. And that's been enough of
Me and this guy talk a bit too much anyway. Take care.
Peace. There you go.